The late afternoon sun spilled molten gold across the endless desert highway, where heat shimmered above the asphalt like waves. A small roadside diner stood alone against the horizon, its neon sign flickering with the words "Eddie's Grill" buzzing faintly in the dry wind. A black vintage Mustang rolled to a smooth stop beside the dusty parking lot. The driver, Keanu Reeves, stepped out quietly, his hair tousled by the breeze, his expression calm but alert. The desert had a way of reminding people of their solitude, but Keanu wasn't alone. From the back seat, a pit bull with a broad chest and gentle eyes hopped down, his paws stirring small clouds of dust as his tail wagged with curiosity. Diesel had once been a stray, wounded and scared, until Keanu found him during a film shoot in Nevada. Since then, the two had been inseparable, a man and his dog, both survivors of their own battles. Inside the diner, the hum of old country music mixed with the clinking of cutlery. A few truckers sat in a corner booth, their laughter loud and careless, while a waitress in her 50s wiped down tables with practiced indifference. Keanu chose a seat near the window, giving Diesel a bowl of water beside his chair. The dog lapped at it contentedly, drawing a few smiles from nearby patrons. "You always steal the show," Keanu murmured, patting Diesel's head. He had no idea that within minutes, the peace of that dusty diner would be shattered by cruelty, and something in him would awaken that hadn't stirred in years. A heavy-set man with grease-stained hands and a baseball cap backward noticed Diesel by Keanu's side. He elbowed one of his companions, smirking. "Another fancy guy with a pit bull. Bet it's for show," he muttered loud enough to be heard. The others chuckled. Diesel's ears perked up, his calm eyes studying the man without hostility, only curiosity. The waitress shot the truckers a warning look, but they ignored her. They were the type of men who thought power came from being feared, not respected. Keanu continued eating his sandwich, pretending not to hear. Years in the spotlight had taught him patience, but also when silence could speak louder than anger. As Diesel wandered a few feet away to sniff near the jukebox, one of the truckers deliberately extended his boot, blocking the dog's path. Diesel stopped, sniffed the boot, and tried to move around it. But the man suddenly kicked forward, not hard, but cruelly enough to make a point. The sharp thud echoed in the diner. Diesel yelped, stumbling back, his tail tucking instinctively between his legs. The laughter that followed cut through the stillness like a blade. Every sound in the diner died except for the fading twang of a steel guitar on the radio. Keanu's fork clinked softly against his plate as he set it down. His face remained calm, but his eyes, dark and steady, shifted toward the man with a focus that made even the waitress pause mid-step. The trucker smirked, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Relax, man. It's just a dog," he said, leaning back in his seat. The room seemed to shrink. Diesel, trembling slightly, looked toward Keanu, who had already stood. The low creak of his chair was the only sound that dared to break the silence. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He simply walked toward Diesel, knelt beside him, and gently placed a hand on the dog's side to check for any injury. Diesel leaned into his touch, eyes soft but frightened. "You're all right, buddy," Keanu said quietly. Then he stood, turned to face the man, and for the first time, the warmth drained from his voice. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his tone calm but carrying the weight of something deeper, a restrained storm waiting to break. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the diner's windows as dust danced through the fading light. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. The man laughed again, but something in his confidence faltered. The rest of the diner watched in silence, their eyes darting between the two men. Diesel stood beside Keanu now, no longer trembling, his head lifted, his body tense but ready. The quiet before the storm was thick enough to feel. The waitress froze by the counter, her hand hovering over the phone. But before anyone could react, the sound of breaking glass cut through the diner, and the real confrontation began. The sound of shattering glass sliced through the stillness like a warning bell, startling everyone in the diner. A glass of soda had slipped from one of the trucker's hands, crashing against the floor, its dark liquid spilling across the tiles like spreading ink. For a moment, no one moved. The radio stuttered to silence, and the flickering neon from outside cast uneasy shadows across the faces inside. Keanu stood motionless, his posture relaxed but his expression sharpened with quiet resolve. Diesel's low growl rumbled from his chest, not fierce but protective, a sound that instantly made the air feel heavier. The truckers looked at one another, and then at Keanu, their earlier bravado starting to falter under his steady gaze. They had expected anger, shouting, maybe even a threat. But instead, they were faced with something far more unsettling: calm strength. The man who had kicked Diesel straightened in his seat, his smirk returning as he tried to reclaim his false confidence. "What's your problem, movie star?" he sneered, tossing a napkin onto the table. "You gonna give me a speech about kindness?" His friends laughed weakly, but their amusement didn't reach their eyes. Keanu's silence lingered like a held breath. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, his boots echoing softly against the tiled floor. "No," he said quietly. "I'm going to give you a choice." His voice was low, deliberate, and carried more weight than any raised tone could. The trucker's smirk twitched, but he masked it quickly with a forced chuckle. "A choice," he repeated. "Between what? Finishing your meal and leaving like a good boy, or—" He stopped mid-sentence as Keanu's eyes locked with his, calm, unflinching, and utterly certain. Diesel's gaze followed the exchange, ears tilted back, body tense but ready. The other customers stayed frozen, torn between fear and curiosity. Even the waitress, who had seen more fights in her years than she cared to count, sensed something different about this one. Keanu's composure wasn't that of a man spoiling for a fight. It was that of someone who understood the cost of one and still didn't back down. "You can apologize to him," Keanu said softly, glancing at Diesel, "and walk out that door. Or you can stay and see what happens when you keep pushing the wrong kind of quiet." The words hung in the air like dust in sunlight. For a heartbeat, the trucker said nothing. Then his chair screeched against the floor as he stood abruptly, his hands curling into fists. "You think you scare me," he spat. "You're just some actor who pretends to be tough." The moment felt fragile, one spark away from eruption. Keanu took a single step forward, close enough for his voice to drop to a calm murmur. "No," he replied, "I'm someone who's tired of watching people hurt things just because they can." The man froze, taken aback by the simplicity of the statement. Around them, even the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter seemed to fade. Diesel took a cautious step closer to Keanu, his eyes never leaving the man who had kicked him. The trucker looked from the dog to Keanu, searching for an edge he no longer had. Something in the actor's stillness unnerved him, like staring into deep water and realizing you didn't know how far down it went. The tension was no longer about a dog, or pride, or an audience. It had become a quiet battle of conscience, and the trucker was losing. Finally, with a forced laugh, he gestured to his friends. "Come on, let's go. Ain't worth the trouble." His companions hesitated, but followed, muttering under their breath as they pushed past the tables and made for the door. As they stepped outside, the wind howled through the open frame, carrying a cloud of desert dust inside with them. Keanu remained still, watching as their taillights disappeared down the highway. Diesel stayed beside him, tail low but no longer tucked, his breathing steadying with every passing second. The diner exhaled collectively, like a room that had been holding its breath too long. The waitress wiped her hands on her apron and gave Keanu a grateful nod. "They've been trouble before," she said softly. "Guess they finally met their match." Keanu crouched down beside Diesel again, his expression softening as he rubbed the dog's shoulder. "You okay, partner?" he asked quietly. Diesel leaned into him, eyes warm, trust unshaken. Outside, the sun had begun to sink, casting long shadows across the sand, as though the desert itself was swallowing the last of the light. Keanu looked toward the horizon, his reflection caught faintly in the diner window. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's get you some air." Together, they stepped out into the cooling twilight, unaware that the truckers hadn't gone far, and that the calm they felt was only temporary. Because some men can't walk away from a bruise to their ego, and in the desert, grudges have a way of coming back with headlights blazing. The desert night came fast, swallowing the last of the sun in a sweep of crimson and gold. The diner's neon sign buzzed weakly against the growing dark, its red glow reflecting in the Mustang's polished surface. Keanu leaned against the hood, finishing a cup of black coffee as Diesel lay beside him, head resting on his paws. The wind had turned cooler, brushing across the sand with a soft, restless hum. For a moment, peace returned, the kind of quiet that only empty roads can offer. But in the distance, faint beams of light began to flicker across the horizon, cutting through the dark like approaching ghosts. Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly as the sound of engines reached him. Rough, uneven, too familiar to ignore. The same truckers from the diner were coming back, their rigs rumbling like thunder rolling across the plains. Diesel stirred first, his ears perking, body rising in silent alert. Keanu followed his gaze, setting the coffee cup down on the car roof. Two trucks rolled closer, engines growling, their headlights glaring bright enough to bleach the sand white. He could see the silhouettes of the men inside, laughing, shouting, one of them leaning out of a window with a bottle in hand. "Stay close," Keanu murmured to Diesel, his voice steady but low. There was no fear in it, just readiness. The trucks pulled into the diner lot, tires crunching over gravel. The lead driver cut his engine, slamming the door open with a loud thud. The man from earlier, the one who had kicked Diesel, stepped out, his face half hidden in the dim light, twisted in a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Couldn't let you drive off thinking you won, Reeves," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Thought maybe we'd finish that conversation." Keanu said nothing. He straightened, hands slipping casually into his jacket pockets. Diesel stood beside him, his stance solid, gaze unflinching. The night air seemed to hum between them, heavy with the scent of dust and engine oil. One of the truckers behind the leader broke into a nervous laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, man, it's not worth it," he said quietly, but his voice carried no conviction. The leader stepped closer, pointing a finger toward Diesel. "That much lucky I didn't kick harder. Maybe I should fix that mistake." That was the moment the last of the restraint in the air snapped. Diesel growled low, the sound deep and vibrating through the ground. Keanu's gaze hardened. No raised voice, no outburst, just a kind of calm that felt more dangerous than rage itself. The man hesitated for half a second, sensing something shift. Keanu took a single step forward, and the trucker instinctively stepped back. "You had your chance to walk away," Keanu said softly, his voice carrying clearly over the wind. "You came back looking for something you don't understand." The words seemed to hang in the air, echoing against the empty highway. The second trucker shuffled his feet, glancing toward the road as if hoping someone else might intervene. But the desert was silent, an endless witness to human folly. The leader sneered, his pride refusing to bend. Big talk for a guy hiding behind a dog. Keanu tilted his head slightly. "I don't hide behind him," he said, his tone sharp as a blade. "I stand with him." The quiet that followed felt thick enough to choke on. The man lunged suddenly, more out of frustration than intent. But before he could take another step, Diesel moved, fast, precise, protective rather than violent. He leapt forward with a bark that split the night air, stopping inches short of the man's boot. The trucker froze, stumbling backward onto the gravel. Diesel stood his ground, hackles raised but eyes still focused, trained, controlled. Keanu's calm voice cut through the panic. "He's better at restraint than most people I've met." The trucker's friends pulled him up, their laughter now gone, replaced with uneasy silence. The leader looked at Keanu, chest heaving, the realization of what he had provoked beginning to settle in. He spat on the ground, muttering, "You'll regret this." Keanu simply shook his head. "No," he said, "but you might." The men climbed back into their trucks, their engines roaring to life once more. Diesel's growl faded as they pulled away, red taillights disappearing into the desert's black horizon. The tension broke like a snapped string. Keanu exhaled slowly, crouching to rest a hand on Diesel's head. "Good boy," he murmured. "You did exactly what you had to." The pit bull leaned into his hand, the adrenaline melting away into trust once again. Above them, the stars stretched wide and cold across the sky. The diner lights flickered behind them, a faint glow in the vast emptiness. Keanu stood, looking toward the highway, his mind quiet but unsettled. He knew it wasn't over. Men like that rarely left things buried. And somewhere down the road, the night still had a lesson to teach. Because when darkness follows you down an empty highway, it's not always the headlights you should be afraid of. The night deepened into an ocean of darkness, and the highway stretched ahead like a ribbon of black glass under the moonlight. Keanu drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, the low hum of the Mustang's engine filling the void between thoughts. Diesel lay in the passenger seat, head resting on the window frame, eyes half closed but alert. The desert around them was endless, a vast expanse of nothingness broken only by the occasional cactus or rusted road sign. Every few miles, the glow of distant headlights would appear and fade, swallowed by the night. Keanu had driven through many lonely places before, but tonight the solitude felt heavier, almost aware. Somewhere behind them, he sensed the echo of those engines, faint but real. The truckers hadn't gone far. Men like that rarely let their pride rest when it had been bruised. As the Mustang curved around a long bend, a flash of light caught his eye in the rearview mirror. It was faint at first, just two distant specks, but within moments, they grew brighter. Diesel lifted his head, a low rumble vibrating in his throat. "I see them," Keanu said softly, his voice calm but taut with focus. The trucks were gaining speed, their engines roaring like beasts hunting in the dark. Keanu's jaw tightened. The diner confrontation had ended without blood, but this was something else, a test of fear, of endurance. He pushed the accelerator slightly, the car responding with a deep growl. The desert wind rushed past, carrying sand that shimmered in the headlights like a storm of tiny sparks. "Hang tight, buddy," he murmured, eyes narrowing on the empty stretch ahead. The lead truck swerved into the opposite lane, its high beams flooding the road in blinding white. It was an intimidation move, reckless and dangerous. Diesel barked sharply, his instincts kicking in. Keanu's grip on the steering wheel tightened, but his mind stayed cold, calculating. The truck drew closer, its horn blaring through the desert silence like a war cry. Then, in a burst of aggression, it veered dangerously close to the Mustang's rear bumper. Keanu downshifted suddenly, letting the truck overshoot with a roar before smoothly pulling behind it again. The maneuver was effortless, practiced, like a dance he had learned long ago in a different kind of chaos. The driver of the truck cursed, slamming his fist against the window. He wasn't expecting calm resistance. He wanted chaos, and Keanu refused to give it. 4 miles, the deadly chase continued. Dust spiraled into the air, the trucks trying to box him in, their lights flaring like predatory eyes. Keanu guided the Mustang with precision, his focus narrowing to the road, the curves, the rhythm of the tires. He wasn't running, he was leading them somewhere. Up ahead, the desert highway forked, one road leading toward a small bridge over a dry ravine. He took the turn sharply, the Mustang's tires screeching briefly against the asphalt. Diesel braced but didn't flinch, his trust in Keanu absolute. Behind them, one of the trucks swerved too late, skidding off course and plowing into a ditch with a thunderous crash. Dust erupted into the air, a storm of sand swallowing metal and light. Keanu didn't look back, he just exhaled through his nose, the kind of controlled breath that comes only from a man who has seen worse and lived through it. The second truck slowed, its driver uncertain, his earlier bravado fading under the weight of what had just happened. Keanu eased the car to a stop at the side of the road, the Mustang idling quietly in the moonlight. Diesel's chest heaved as he stared back at the mess of headlights and debris behind him. Keanu stepped out, the cold night air brushing against his face, and watched as the second truck slowly reversed and drove away. The desert swallowed its retreating sound, leaving only silence and the faint crackle of cooling metal. He crouched beside Diesel, his hand resting on the dog's neck. "It's over," he whispered, though part of him knew it wasn't. Men like that always returned, not because they were brave, but because they couldn't stand losing to decency. Still, for now, the road ahead was theirs again, quiet, open, waiting. He looked up at the sky, where the stars burned clear and defiant, ancient witnesses to humanity's endless lessons. Diesel leaned against him, tail thumping softly against the sand. The night had tested them both, not just their courage, but their restraint. Keanu gave a faint smile, the kind that never reached his eyes but hinted at gratitude. "You did good, partner," he said quietly. The wind answered with a low whisper that carried across the dunes, the desert reclaiming its silence. Somewhere far off, the faint sound of sirens began to echo, growing closer with every passing second. Keanu's expression changed. It wasn't relief. It was anticipation. Because this time, he wasn't the only one who had seen what happened on that road. But what he didn't know was that someone had been filming the entire chase from a passing car, and by morning, the world would see what really happened in the desert. The desert dawn arrived slow and pale, painting the horizon in muted shades of amber and gray. Keanu sat by the Mustang on the shoulder of a highway, the night's tension still clinging to the air like leftover smoke. Diesel rested beside him, finally asleep, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The silence was heavy but calm, that strange stillness that comes only after a storm. Keanu's eyes followed the distant stretch of the road, where faint tire marks scarred the sand. He didn't need to look back at the wreckage to know what had happened. One truck lay abandoned, the other had escaped into the dark. He hadn't gone looking for trouble, but somehow, trouble had found him again. The desert had a cruel way of forcing people to show who they truly were. For some, it brought peace. For others, it exposed their demons. The sound of gravel crunching behind him broke his quiet reflection. A dusty SUV pulled over, its doors opening to reveal a young couple who had seen the chase from afar. The man approached hesitantly, his phone in hand. "Mr. Reeves?" he asked, almost uncertain if it was really him. Keanu turned, his expression calm but weary, nodding slightly. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "You were behind us last night." The young man nodded, looking almost nervous. "We caught everything on video. The trucks, the chase. Even when that one crashed. We wanted to make sure you were okay." His girlfriend joined him, holding up the phone screen. The video played back the chaos of a night. The headlights, the sandstorm, the way Keanu's car swerved to avoid disaster. But what struck Keanu most wasn't the danger. It was the look of focus on his own face and Diesel's unwavering courage beside him. The girl hesitated before speaking, her voice soft but firm. "We're thinking of posting this. People should see it. The way they tried to hurt you, the way you protected your dog, it says something." Keanu looked at her for a long moment, the morning wind lifting strands of her hair. He wasn't a man who sought attention, and the thought of another viral clip tied to his name didn't appeal to him. But then his gaze fell to Diesel, who had woken and was watching quietly, his brown eyes filled with trust and loyalty. "Maybe you're right," Keanu said finally, his tone contemplative. "Not for me, though. For him, and for what it means." The couple smiled, relieved. The man promised to send the footage before they left, their SUV kicking up dust as it disappeared down the highway once more. The desert fell silent again, but the weight of their decision lingered. Later that day, Keanu stopped at a small motel near the edge of town. The walls were sun-faded, and the sign out front flickered with half-lit letters. Inside, Diesel rested on a blanket while Keanu sat by the window, his phone buzzing with notifications. The video had gone live, and within hours, it exploded across every platform. Headlines flooded in: "Keanu Reeves stands up for his dog in real-life confrontation." Asterisk actor's calm courage goes viral after desert showdown. Asterisk, but the attention wasn't just about the chase. People were moved by Diesel, the way he never attacked, only protected, the quiet strength in his eyes. Keanu scrolled through comments that spoke of empathy, kindness, and courage. For once, the internet had found something worth admiring, not spectacle, but compassion. He closed his phone slowly, his mind both humbled and heavy. "Guess the world needed this, huh?" he murmured, glancing at Diesel, who wagged his tail as if in agreement. By evening, journalists were calling, networks were reaching out, and animal shelters were tagging him in posts. People had begun sharing their own stories of rescued pets, of loyalty and second chances. Keanu didn't answer any interviews. Instead, he sat outside under the fading sky, Diesel beside him, watching the sun disappear into the desert once more. The same land that had nearly brought out the worst in some had now shown the best in others. For Keanu, the lesson was simple. Cruelty spreads fast, but kindness spreads faster when given the chance. He reached down, scratching Diesel behind the ear. "You changed more than you know, buddy," he whispered. The dog leaned into his hand, content, his tail thumping softly against the porch. As darkness settled, the first stars blinked awake above them, vast and unbothered by the noise of the world below. Keanu looked at them, his thoughts quiet but clear. He had faced fame, loss, and chaos, but nothing ever taught him more about humanity than the loyalty of one dog. Diesel had reminded him, strength isn't in fighting back, it's in protecting what matters most. The phone buzzed again with another wave of messages, but this time he let it ring. He didn't need to read what the world thought of him. The truth was already sitting beside him, breathing softly in the desert night. But as the stars faded behind clouds, Keanu didn't realize the men from a highway had seen the viral video too, and their revenge was already on its way. The night air had cooled, carrying with it the faint scent of desert rain. Keanu sat on the small wooden porch of the motel, sipping coffee from a chipped cup while Diesel dozed nearby, his rhythmic breathing blending with the whisper of the wind. The glow from the nearby highway was faint, like a memory flickering in the distance. It had been a long day, the kind that drained you quietly, not with noise, but with the weight of everything unsaid. The viral video had changed the narrative, turning what began as cruelty into a story of loyalty and restraint. Yet even with the world praising his calm, Keanu couldn't shake the unease that lingered beneath it all. He had seen the way those men looked at him before they drove off. Some people could lose a fight, but not their pride. And pride, in wounded men, was often more dangerous than hatred itself. Inside the motel room, the hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. Diesel stirred restlessly, ears twitching as though catching a sound that hadn't yet reached human ears. Keanu looked up from the couch where he sat, sensing the shift in his companion's posture. Diesel rose slowly, moving toward the window, a low growl building deep in his chest. Keanu followed his gaze and caught it, the faint beam of headlights pulling into the gravel lot outside. It was late, far too late for travelers, and the shape of the vehicles made his stomach tighten. 2 trucks, the same ones from before, or what was left of them. He stood slowly, setting the coffee aside, his body calm but his mind already calculating. "Easy," he whispered to Diesel, though the dog was already alert, muscles tense but controlled. Outside, engines cut out, leaving only the creak of cooling metal and the crunch of boots on gravel. The door to the motel office opened first. The old clerk's voice carried faintly, a mix of confusion and fear. Keanu moved silently to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see. The truckers were back, faces hard, their movements deliberate. They weren't laughing anymore. The man who had kicked Diesel walked in front, a bruise darkening his jaw, his eyes burning with something close to desperation. They weren't here for redemption. They were here to erase humiliation. "Stay inside," Keanu murmured to Diesel, but the pit bull's growl deepened, unwilling to let him face danger alone. The leader banged on the door of the office, shouting something Keanu couldn't quite make out, then turned toward the row of rooms, scanning, hunting. His hand gripped something heavy, glinting briefly under the weak light. A tire iron. Keanu exhaled slowly, his thoughts sharpening into instinct. This wasn't about heroics, it was about control, survival, and keeping Diesel safe. The sound of a door slamming broke the fragile stillness. One of the truckers had spotted the Mustang parked under the lamp. "He's here!" The shout ripped through the quiet, and suddenly, footsteps echoed closer. Diesel barked once, loud and commanding, the kind of sound that made even the reckless hesitate. Keanu stepped outside before they could reach the door. He stood tall, framed by the dull glow of the porch light, his shadow long and still across the gravel. "You came a long way just to make the same mistake twice," he said, his tone calm but edged with warning. The leader sneered. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone," he spat. "And now the whole world's laughing." His voice cracked on the last word, anger masking humiliation. "You should have stayed quiet, Reeves. You and that mutt." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "You could have done the same," he replied evenly. "But here you are." For a moment, no one moved. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The other truckers shifted uneasily, glancing between Keanu and his friend, the reality of what they were doing finally sinking in. Diesel stood by Keanu's side, his gaze locked, body rigid but disciplined, a silent guardian waiting for permission. The leader raised the tire iron, his knuckles white with fury. But before he could swing, the blinding flash of blue and red lights burst across the lot. Sirens wailed, cutting through the night as police cruisers screeched to a halt. Officers spilled out, weapons drawn, voices commanding and sharp. The truckers froze where they stood, faces draining of color. Keanu didn't move. He simply lowered his hand toward Diesel, signaling him to stay calm. Within seconds, the men were surrounded, their aggression crumbling into fear. One officer, recognizing Keanu, gave a small nod before approaching cautiously. "We got a call," he said. "Someone saw them heading this way. Looks like we came just in time." The officers cuffed the truckers one by one, their protests lost beneath the crackle of radios and the shuffle of boots. The leader tried to speak, his words tangled in excuses, but the officer cut him off. Save it, he said firmly. We've seen the video. You're done. The desert, moments ago filled with the threat of violence, now echoed only with the sound of justice arriving late but firm. Keanu watched silently as they were led away, the lights painting the sand in red and blue. Diesel leaned against his leg, the tension in his body finally easing. It's over, Keanu whispered, though part of him knew it wasn't entirely true. Some things never truly end. They just teach you how to stand taller the next time they return. He glanced at Diesel, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his lips. You did good, partner, he said quietly. Diesel wagged his tail, and for the first time in a long while, the desert night felt safe again. But as the officers drove away and silence returned to the sand, one of the men in the back of the cruiser turned his head and smiled, because the story that was supposed to end tonight was about to begin again, somewhere far worse than the desert. The next morning broke with a pale, washed-out light that crept slowly across the motel parking lot, chasing away the last fragments of the night's chaos. The scent of rain still lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the dry heat of the desert. Keanu stood by the Mustang, quietly tightening a strap on the roof rack, his movements calm and deliberate. Diesel sat a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the distant highway that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The police had taken the men away hours earlier, leaving behind only the faint echo of sirens and tire tracks carved deep into the gravel. It should have felt like closure, like the end of something dark. But as Keanu looked out at the vast emptiness before him, he couldn't help but feel that peace was always temporary. Fragile, fleeting, and easily disturbed by those who couldn't let go of their own shadows. Inside the small diner next to the motel, the news was already playing on a flickering TV mounted in the corner. The morning anchors spoke with forced excitement, replaying clips of the viral video alongside grainy footage from the police dashcams. Actor Keanu Reeves helps expose violent truckers in desert altercation, one headline read, while another described Diesel as the internet's new symbol of loyalty. Patrons murmured in admiration as they watched, but Keanu barely listened. He sipped his coffee in silence, his eyes unfocused, his mind still wandering through the events of the past 2 days. Fame was something he had learned to live with, the weight of eyes that watched every step, every decision. But this, he thought, was different. This wasn't a movie. This was real, raw, and unpredictable. He wondered how many times in his life he had been forced to play the reluctant hero, not because he wanted to, but because someone else's cruelty demanded it. Diesel lay under the table, his head resting on Keanu's boot, eyes half closed but alert to every sound. The waitress, the same one from the diner the night before, approached with a soft smile. "You heading out soon?" she asked, her tone gentle, almost protective. Keanu looked up and nodded. "Yeah, it's time to move on." She hesitated before speaking again. "You did the right thing, you know. Most people would have walked away." Keanu's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "Sometimes walking away is the right thing," he said quietly. "But sometimes, silence lets the wrong people think they've won." The waitress nodded thoughtfully, placing a small to-go cup in front of him. "On the house," she said with a wink. "For the road." Diesel's tail thumped once against the floor as if to thank her. Keanu smiled, slipping a few bills under the saucer before standing up. He had never been a man of many words, but his actions had always spoken enough for him. As he stepped outside, the desert sun had begun to rise higher, spreading warmth across the sand. The Mustang gleamed under the light, its black surface mirroring the endless sky. Keanu opened the door for Diesel, who hopped in with practiced ease, circling once before settling into his spot. For a brief moment, Keanu stood still, taking in the quiet. There was something about the desert that stripped life down to its essentials. No pretense, no illusion, just the raw truth of survival. Maybe that was why it always drew him back, no matter how far he went. He climbed into the car, turned the key, and listened to the low rumble of the engine. Steady, reliable, alive. The road stretched ahead, open and uncertain, but he had learned to find comfort in uncertainty. With Diesel beside him, he knew that no matter what waited beyond the horizon, they'd face it together. As the Mustang rolled away from the motel, the wind carried with it the faint echo of voices from the diner, fading quickly into the distance. Keanu drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on Diesel's back. The road ahead shimmered in the heat, a thin silver line weaving through the heart of the desert. Behind them, the motel shrank into a speck, swallowed by sand and sun. For the first time in days, Keanu allowed himself to breathe fully, to let the tension in his shoulders ease. He wasn't sure where they were headed, maybe north, maybe toward the mountains, but direction didn't matter anymore. Sometimes, it wasn't about escaping the past, but about giving it time to fade into the distance, 1 mile at a time. Yet as the miles passed and the world around them turned to gold beneath the sun, Keanu's mind couldn't quite let go of a single haunting thought, the smile on the face of the man in the police cruiser. It wasn't the expression of defeat, but of someone who knew something more, something unfinished. And though Keanu didn't yet understand what that meant, he could feel the weight of it following him like a shadow on the road. Because in the vast silence of a desert, not every ghost is left behind. Some just learn to follow quietly, waiting for the right moment to return. The road wound deeper into the desert, carving through hills of red and gold dust that shimmered under the unforgiving sun. Hours had passed since Keanu left the motel behind, and the rhythm of the tires on the asphalt had become hypnotic, a steady heartbeat against the endless quiet. Diesel rested in the passenger seat, his nose pressed lightly to the crack of the window, the wind fluttering through his fur. For the first time in what felt like days, the tension seemed to ease. There was no sound of engines behind them, no headlights flashing in the rearview mirror, no threat lurking in the dark. Just the road, the horizon, and the feeling of freedom. Keanu let out a slow breath, his fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel. Yet, beneath that fragile calm, a voice whispered that this peace was borrowed, not earned, because men who lived on anger didn't forgive humiliation. They waited for it to fester, and then they came back. The sun began to dip low, throwing long shadows across the highway. Keanu decided to stop at a small overlook just off the road, a lonely place where the desert fell away into a canyon of deep orange stone. He parked the Mustang near the edge, the engine's low purr fading into silence. Diesel jumped out, stretching his legs before trotting toward the edge of the cliff. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Keanu followed, his gaze sweeping across the vast expanse below. The horizon burned gold, and for a moment it looked almost peaceful again, like the world had forgiven everything. He knelt beside Diesel, scratching behind his ears. "We made it, buddy," he murmured, his voice soft but edged with fatigue. "You and me, no script, no cameras, just this." Diesel leaned against him, eyes half closed, content in the simplicity of the moment. Then, the faint crunch of gravel shattered the stillness. Keanu froze, his senses sharpening instantly. The sound came again, soft, deliberate, and too close to be the wind. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing as he caught the reflection of sunlight off metal. Up on the hill behind them, half hidden by the rocks, stood a dark pickup truck. The engine was off, but the driver's door hung open, and the figure leaning against it was unmistakable. Even from a distance, Keanu recognized the man's stance, the same posture, the same defiance. It was the trucker, the one who had kicked Diesel, the one who had smiled in the back of the cruiser. Somehow, he was free. Whether by bail or by favor, it didn't matter. What mattered was the look in his eyes, cold and empty, like someone who had nothing left to lose. Keanu stood, the wind whipping his jacket as he moved between Diesel and the truck. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Diesel obeyed, his body tense but silent, understanding the shift in the air. The man started down the slope, slow but purposeful. His boots scraped against the rocks, his hands buried in his pockets until he was close enough for Keanu to see the faint grin on his face. "You took everything from me," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "My job, my friends, my name's a joke now." He took another step closer, his eyes darkening. All because of a stupid dog and some movie star who thinks he's a hero. Keanu didn't respond at first. He simply studied the man's face, the raw anger that had replaced reason. "You did that to yourself," he said finally, his voice even. "You made a choice that night. All I did was make sure people saw who you really are." The man laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, maybe it's time they see who you really are too." He reached into his jacket, and the glint of metal caught the sun for an instant. In that heartbeat, everything slowed. Diesel barked once, sharp and warning, as Keanu stepped forward, his instincts taking over. "Don't," he said, his voice calm but cutting through the wind like steel. You're already past the point of redemption. Don't go further." The man hesitated, his hand trembling slightly, the weight of his own rage fighting against reason. The wind howled between them, carrying the sound of distant thunder from an oncoming storm. Diesel stood beside Keanu, growling low, his body coiled and ready. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then, as if the desert itself intervened, a crack of thunder echoed through the canyon, startling the man. His grip faltered, the weapon slipping slightly, and in that moment of distraction, Keanu stepped forward and kicked the metal from his hand, sending it skidding across the sand. The man stumbled back, shock overtaking his fury. Diesel barked again, standing his ground as the man froze in place, defeated not by violence, but by the calm that refused to break. Keanu stood over him, breathing steady, eyes fixed on the man's face. "It's over," he said quietly. "You can keep fighting ghosts, but they'll only drag you further down." The man's defiance finally cracked. He looked away, shoulders slumping, his anger dissolving into the dust. Keanu turned, calling Diesel to his side. Together, they walked back toward the Mustang as the first drops of rain began to fall. Soft, cold, cleansing. The storm rolled in, covering the canyon in a haze of silver. Keanu opened the door for Diesel, who climbed in and curled up quietly, his eyes never leaving his friend. As Keanu started the engine, he glanced once more at the man standing alone in the rain. Smaller now, broken, washed clean of all his noise. Without another word, Keanu drove away, the tires splashing through puddles as thunder rolled overhead. The road ahead blurred beneath the rain, streaks of lightning illuminating the vast desert one last time. Diesel rested his head on Keanu's arm, and for the first time since that day at the diner, peace didn't feel like a temporary illusion. It felt earned. It felt real. Keanu smiled faintly, eyes on the road. "We're finally done," he whispered. Diesel gave a soft whine of agreement before closing his eyes again. The storm followed them for miles, like a curtain falling on the last act of a long, unfinished play. And when it finally cleared, the desert was quiet again, as if it had decided to forget. But far away in the city, as the storm faded, a journalist replayed the new footage from that canyon, and what he saw in Keanu's eyes was about to spark a story the world wasn't ready for. The storm had moved east overnight, leaving behind a washed-clean sky streaked with ribbons of dawn light. In the city hundreds of miles away, the rain had already faded, replaced by the hum of traffic and the endless chatter of news feeds. Inside a downtown newsroom, a young journalist named Adrian sat hunched over his desk, headphones on, eyes fixed on his monitor. He replayed the footage for what felt like the 10th time. Grainy video from a passing hiker's dashcam showing Keanu Reeves standing in the canyon, the trucker on his knees, and Diesel poised at his side. There was something haunting in the image. The quiet power of a man refusing to meet violence with rage. Adrian leaned closer, pausing the frame where Keanu's expression was caught mid-breath. Calm, resolute, yet filled with an emotion that words couldn't capture. "This isn't just a story," Adrian murmured to himself. "It's something bigger." His editor walked by, tossing a paper onto his desk. "That's old news, kid. Reeves saved a dog. Hero stuff. Move on." But Adrian shook his head. "No," he said softly. "You're missing what really happened out there." Across town, social media was already buzzing again. Someone had leaked the canyon video overnight, and within hours it spread like wildfire. Hashtags lit up screens. Hashtag Reeves Rescue. Hashtag Desert Confrontation. Hashtag Man and Dog. Millions watched the quiet moment when Keanu stopped a man's downward spiral without ever throwing a punch. What made it different was that no one had filmed the fight. They had captured the choice, the decision to end it without anger. Commentators and talk shows tried to dissect it, turning it into a debate about fame, morality, and restraint. But to most viewers, it was simpler than that. They saw a man standing up against cruelty without becoming cruel himself. Diesel became a symbol again, his image spreading across pages and profiles. A pit bull once rescued from pain, now teaching the world about loyalty and strength through quiet presence. In an age addicted to noise, their silence spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Keanu knew nothing of the growing storm online. He and Diesel had left the desert behind, driving north toward the hills. The Mustang's windows were down, letting in the crisp morning air scented with pine and earth. For the first time in weeks, he felt the weight lift from his shoulders. There were no flashing lights, no confrontations, no eyes watching him from behind screens. Just the road, winding through the trees, and the occasional bark from Diesel when they passed another traveler. He found a small cabin near a lake, quiet, tucked away from the world, and decided to stay for a while. As he unpacked a few things, Diesel bounded out of the car, chasing a butterfly that danced lazily above the grass. Keanu watched him, smiling faintly. "That's how it's supposed to be," he whispered, half to himself. "Just simple. Just free." The sound of water lapping against the shore was all the soundtrack he needed. By afternoon, Keanu sat by the lake with his notebook open. He wasn't writing for anyone else, not for a studio, not for a script, just for himself. The pen moved slowly, words spilling like quiet confessions, about strength without violence, compassion in the face of cruelty, and how loyalty was the purest form of courage. Diesel lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to nuzzle Keanu's leg before drifting back into sleep. For the first time in a long while, the world felt distant enough to be peaceful. He didn't know that, even now, the video was making headlines across continents. People were quoting his calm, replaying his silence, turning a private moment into a global message. But maybe that was the way truth worked. It spread without permission, carried by those who needed to hear it most. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, Keanu closed his notebook and leaned back, letting the last warmth of the day touch his face. Diesel stirred beside him, stretching before resting his head in Keanu's lap. The lake mirrored the fading sky, golden and still. "We did good, buddy," Keanu said softly, scratching behind Diesel's ears. "Maybe that's enough for now." Diesel wagged his tail, as if agreeing. The moment was quiet, honest, and utterly human, the kind of peace that can't be manufactured, only earned. Yet somewhere far away, in a world that never stopped talking, Keanu Reeves had unknowingly become more than an actor again. He had become a mirror, a reminder that strength wasn't measured by how loudly you fought, but by how gently you stood your ground. That night, as stars filled the sky above the lake, the world kept watching the man in the canyon and his loyal dog. News anchors debated it, children shared it, and strangers found hope in it. Somewhere in the noise, Adrian's article finally went live, titled simply asterisk, "The Day Kindness Stood Its Ground." Asterisk, it wasn't about fame, or heroism, or even Keanu Reeves. It was about the choice every person could make when faced with cruelty. To step forward, to stand steady, to let calm conquer chaos. And as Keanu sat by the water, unaware of the ripple he had set in motion, Diesel lifted his head to the stars, as if sensing that the world, for once, was learning something right. But as peace finally settled in the mountains, another letter was already on its way to that quiet cabin, one that would pull Keanu and Diesel into a new chapter, where the cost of compassion would be tested once more. The morning mist hung low over the lake, blurring the line between water and sky. Keanu stepped onto the porch of the small cabin, a mug of coffee warming his hands as the world around him slowly came to life. Birds called softly from the trees, their songs echoing across the still surface of the lake. Diesel was already awake, padding through the damp grass near the water's edge, chasing the reflection of his own tail in the rippling light. The calm was perfect, unbroken, the kind of silence that wrapped itself around you like a promise. But peace, Keanu knew, never lasted forever. When the sound of gravel crunching under tires reached his ears, his brows furrowed slightly. Few people ever came this far out, and fewer still without a reason. He set the mug down, his body instinctively alert, not from fear, but from the understanding that calm and chaos often walked hand in hand. A delivery van emerged from the curve of the dirt road, its engine rumbling softly before it rolled to a stop in front of the cabin. The driver, a young woman in a faded cap, stepped out, carrying a small, weathered envelope. "Morning, sir," she called out with a polite smile. "Got something for you. Says it's urgent." Keanu approached, curiosity flickering behind his calm exterior. He hadn't told anyone where he was staying, and he wasn't expecting mail. The woman handed him the envelope, nodded politely, and returned to her van, disappearing down the winding road just as quietly as she'd arrived. Keanu turned the letter over in his hands. The paper was rough, old-fashioned, and his name was written in careful handwriting, not printed, not typed. There was no return address. Diesel came trotting up beside him, tail wagging softly, his warm breath fogging in the cool air. "Guess somebody still remembers how to write," Keanu murmured, crouching down beside his companion. "What do you think, buddy? Should we open it?" Inside the cabin, the soft crackle of the fireplace filled the quiet. Keanu sat at the small wooden table, the unopened envelope resting in front of him. Diesel lay nearby, his head resting on his paws but his eyes following every movement. Finally, Keanu tore it open carefully and unfolded the paper within. The handwriting was neat but heavy, like someone who had rewritten their words several times before finding the courage to send them. He began to read. Asterisk, Mr. Reeves, you don't know me, but you might remember my brother. He was one of the truckers. The one you stopped in the desert. Asterisk. Keanu's expression shifted slightly, not with surprise, but with a quiet sadness. The letter continued. Asterisk. He's been different since that night. He lost everything for what he did, but he also learned something from you. He talks about you and your dog, about how you didn't fight back, how you made him see himself for what he'd become. He's in rehab now. He said to tell you, thank you. Asterisk. Keanu leaned back in his chair, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Outside, the lake shimmered in the morning light, a mirror to the emotions stirring within him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Diesel shifted, sensing the weight of the moment, and rested his head gently against Keanu's knee. You hear that? Keanu whispered softly. Even the ones who fall the hardest can find their way back. His voice cracked just slightly, the quiet strength giving way to something gentler, the relief that maybe, just maybe, all of it had meant something. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope, setting it on the mantel beside the few belongings he had carried with him. Some things didn't need to be framed or displayed. Some were meant to remind you, in silence, that doing the right thing was never wasted. Later that afternoon, Keanu and Diesel took their usual walk along the edge of the lake. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and rain-soaked soil. Each step felt lighter than the one before, the heaviness of the past few days slowly dissolving into the landscape around them. Diesel ran ahead, splashing through the shallows, barking joyfully at the reflection of the sky. Keanu watched him, smiling quietly to himself. He thought of all the people who had watched that video, the strangers who found hope in it, the ones who changed because of it, and now, even the man who had started it all. The world, he realized, wasn't made better by grand gestures or heroics. It changed through the quiet choices, the ones made in moments when no one else was watching. You were right, Diesel, he said softly. Sometimes kindness doesn't just stop cruelty, it heals it. As the sun began to set, painting the lake in shades of golden fire, Keanu sat down on a rock near the water's edge. Diesel trotted over, shaking droplets of water from his fur before curling up beside him. Together, they watched the light fade, their reflections shimmering on the calm surface. The world felt vast again, open and forgiving. Keanu reached down, running his hand through Diesel's fur, his voice barely more than a whisper. Maybe that's all we were meant to do, he said. Just remind people what decency looks like. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a hawk overhead. Diesel's tail thumped softly against the ground, as if in quiet agreement. The lake reflected the stars now, scattered like diamonds across the dark water. When the first chill of night settled, Keanu rose, brushing dust from his jeans. Diesel followed, always at his side. The path back to the cabin glowed faintly in the silver light of the moon. Behind them, the lake rippled once more, catching the starlight in waves. The letter on the mantel waited inside, a simple piece of paper, but proof that even the smallest act of compassion could ripple far beyond its moment. Keanu paused at the cabin door, glancing up at the sky. Come on, buddy, he said with a faint smile. Let's rest. Tomorrow's another road. Diesel wagged his tail, brushing against Keanu's leg as they stepped inside. The door closed softly behind them, leaving only the sound of the wind and the gentle crackle of the fire, a quiet testament that kindness, once set in motion, never really ends. Because sometimes, the greatest stories don't end with applause, they end in silence, where kindness keeps echoing long after the world stops watching.